Has two meetings today, our workshops, which actually consist of 3 different subjects, and a special meeting which will include board discussion items. Viewers and listeners can access the meeting today by either watching on Comcast channels 234 and 235, UVerse channel 99, or by using the YouTube link on our webpage at palmbeachschools.org. We also offer a listening-only option which the public can access by calling 561-357-5900 or toll-free at 1-866-930-7015. The meeting ID is 1-561-880-1124 #. Call the workshop to order at 2:33 p.m. on February 3rd, 2021. Mrs. Bass, please call the roll.
District 1, Barbara McQuinn. Here. District 2, Alexandria Ayala. District 3, Karen Brill. Here. District 4, Erica Whitfield. Here. District 5, Frank Barbieri.
Here.
District 6, Marcia Andrews. Here. District 7, Deborah Robinson.
We have quorum with 6 board members present. Also joining us on our dais is Superintendent Dr. Donald Fenoy, and joining us here at the tables in front of us until they can once again join us at the dais after social distancing requirements are no longer necessary, our General Counsel Sean Bernard, Inspector General Teresa Michael, and Board Clerk Carol Bass. Senior staff members will join us periodically as directed by the Superintendent. This meeting is being transcribed by a closed captioner, so please remember to speak at a reasonable pace. Will everyone please stand for the pledge to be led by Superintendent Fenoy?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Superintendent, you can go ahead and take over.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Burke and the wonderful Ms. Heather Canoose to go over our first workshop for the evening.
All right, thank you and good afternoon. You know, I've always talked about taking a surgical approach to budget reductions, and now with these masks on, I'm starting to really feel like a true budget doctor. I don't know about you, Dr. Canoose, but anyway, it's not a bad look. It's when we show up dressed as lumberjacks that you really have to get concerned. All right, we'll jump into it. Mark, can you hit the PowerPoint there? Or Heather? Okay, thank you. Just a quick outline. So we're going to talk a little bit about the economy in general, what's the latest with our stimulus funds, and then, of course, our state revenue forecast for next year. And we do have the benefit of the governor's budget, which came in late last week, and Ms. Canoose is going to get into that in detail. It's actually a very favorable budget proposal, but we're concerned that may not survive throughout the legislative session as they work to close a gap in their budget. And we're also going to touch on, you've got a great workshop this afternoon with Mr. Oswald and Dr. Sheffield that's going to get into the academic supports. And at this point, the budget has played a role in that. That's going to be an ongoing effort, but that work is getting underway. So first with the stimulus, the first round of stimulus, of course, came out back in March. It was $13.5 billion for the entire country, K-12 schools, and our share in Palm Beach was a little over $40 million. Those monies they're fully allocated and spent. That first round of stimulus is kind of in our wake. And now we're moving on to the second round of stimulus, which was approved in late December. This was a much more generous stimulus package for K-12 education. It provided $54.3 billion, which is 4 times the amount of the original ESSER 1 allocation, so that's great. Our share in Palm Beach County is estimated at $156.7 million. A portion of that will pass through to charter schools and eligible private schools, but it's going to be a substantial sum of money. We hope that a lot of it doesn't go to just mitigate potential state reductions, and that we have the bulk of those dollars available to help address the learning loss and the heightened needs of our students. And these funds may have to carry us for 2 years. You're allowed to spend the money through FY23. So we're going to have to be very strategic on how we use these dollars. It's going to play a major role in our budget development. And we want to do things, that will help address the academic need, but not create a lot of recurring costs that are going to extend beyond this grant, because you could get into trouble that way. So we're going to have to really be thoughtful how we use these dollars to have the greatest impact and not put undue pressure in the budget in future years. And then the promising news we've heard as of late is, of course, President Biden has proposed the American Rescue Plan. It's a $1.9 trillion stimulus package in total, with about $130 billion going to K-12 education. And if you go back to what the Council of Great City Schools recommended early on, they said it was going to take about $200 billion to fully kind of address education's needs. And if you add up these potential 3 rounds of stimulus, you get up to about $198 billion. So you're getting close to what the council recommended. Of course, we're not sure where the president's plan will go. I believe there was a counteroffer by the Senate Republicans this week that would have provided about $20 billion for K-12 schools. So we're watching that closely, and I know our lobbyist team is as well. The bills are starting to get filed for the upcoming session. And we had 2 that had a budget implication we wanted to talk about today. There's Senate Bill 48 filed by Manny Diaz, and this merges some of the existing voucher programs, creates room for expansion and greater access to these vouchers. So it doesn't come at a particularly good time when we're trying to recover our students. The legislature looks like they may be working to give kids more options outside of public schools to go to private schools. But what this bill would do was combine the 2 ESE scholarships, which are McKay and Gardner, into one program. It would add a flexible spending account or educational savings account to that program, where parents could use those funds to pay for tutoring, electronic devices, summer programs, etc. And then the other part of this is there's a merging of three programs. We got the Hope Scholarship, the tax credit scholarships, and the family empowerment scholarships that were created in 2019. And those would all be combined into one group. And again, they kind of expand, the eligibility for those programs would be expanded to 300% of the poverty level, which is about $80,000 a year for family income. That's up from about $60,000 now. And that's well above the median family income for Florida. So, these voucher programs are growing. We're at about 140,000 kids in our state right now with a voucher, and the growth is starting to take off. So that could potentially put strain on public schools across the state. The other one, this may sound familiar to you. So Senate Bill 7018, we dealt with the FRS increase last year, and that's the rate that we pay towards our employee pension fund. This is required of all participating agencies in the Florida retirement system. Last year, we experienced a 1.5% increase, which is about $15.5 billion. And we expect this to be a recurring trend as the state works to address one of the assumptions within the pension fund is their expected rate of return on their investments. And they were at about 7.4% as an anticipated return. The actuaries that study the pension fund said that's too high. You need to get down to to 6.5% or 6%. So they've started steadily chipping away at that rate, but it has huge cost implications. So Senate Bill 7018 spells out potential rates for us. In this bill, they appear to be less than what we experienced last year, about 50% of the increase. So I don't know if they're trying to take a smaller bite at the apple, but we'll have to continue to watch that closely. On the economic concerns, so the legislature, they're always provided with a revenue forecast. And this year, you can imagine those forecasts have to be updated more frequently. On January 14th, the lead state economist, Amy Baker, presented to the Senate, and we watched her presentation real close to just see if we could get any insight into what we might expect. There's been some good news with the sales tax. It's at least here in Palm Beach County, it's bounced back pretty strong. The Orange County, Orlando, is still down quite a bit, as you can imagine, because just the tourism and Disney World and all that just have not got back to where they used to be. But what they've seen is, in general, there's been kind of a shift. So they saw people's personal savings uptick a little bit because they were going out to eat less or not going to the dry cleaner. But then they've seen people start to take those savings and buy larger goods. Maybe they're buying a refrigerator instead of going to the dry cleaner every week. So that's kind of bolstered sales tax collections in the short term. The economist wasn't sure how long this would continue. And they're watching the COVID cases closely too to see what's the future look like for the service industry. And then with tourism, while tourism has come back to some extent, it's at a much reduced level than prior years. And, you know, a lot of people probably still aren't ready to jump on a cruise ship just yet. So that's continuing to be a concern. And then on the school taxable value, which is our property taxes based on, you know, home values, that's fairly strong, but it is dropping. We were expected, you know, the last few years we've grown by 5 or 6%. The current estimate is we'll grow by about 2.59% next year. So that's going to bring in a little less tax revenue than we've enjoyed in the past. The bottom line with all of this is that the legislature at this point is being told you've got a $2 billion revenue shortfall. And $2 billion out of their general revenue is a pretty significant chunk. And with education representing about 34% of that general revenue budget, you know, we could potentially share in that budget reduction. I was pleased that the governor, looks like he really did actually protect education and try to increase our funding. So we'll have to see if the House and Senate can live up to that expectation or recommendation. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Knust here, and she's done broken down all the details on the governor's budget and what that might mean for our school district.
All right, so this first slide should look very familiar to you. This is where we break out and we compare our current FEFP funding to the FY22 proposed budgets. So as of right now, we have the governor's proposal. We'll add in the Senate and the House version once they're received. When you look at that first column there, it's called the second calculation. Normally at this time of the year, we would have what's called the third calculation, which would represent our actual enrollment as of the October survey. But since FDOE is holding us harmless, they just saw no need to do a third calculation. So that second calculation represents still just our projected enrollment and what we're going to continue to be paid on throughout FY21. So that is 194,000 students. That's district-wide. So that's not only represents district-operated schools, but charter schools, as well as McKay and family empowerment scholarships. So we know that our enrollment is really about 7,300 or over 7,000 less than that 194,000. So looking at the governor's proposal, where our projected enrollment is expected to be, at least at this point, is 189,500, which is a reduction of 5,100 students. Which you know that since we're down over 7,000, that actually represents an increase of approximately 2,000 students year over year if you're comparing it to actual enrollment. So moving down to that third row there, the base student allocation, the governor is proposing a $132 increase in the base student allocation. And if our district cost differential holds steady, that would represent an increase of $137 in the BSA, which was really, we were very pleasantly surprised to see the governor actually put that funding back into education and really hold us harmless. If our enrollment had stayed steady and constant, we would have seen a $30 million increase in our funding. So with that increase in the BSA, it really has helped to just kind of keep our funding level with the prior year. Looking at the decreases and the declines in the other categoricals, that's primarily because of the decrease and decline in enrollment. Moving down to rows 24 and 25, the Florida Teacher Compensation Program, that's the new categorical that was implemented last year, where that increased the beginning teacher pay up to the $47,500. The governor is proposing putting in $50 million total district statewide. Our share would be $3.2 million. And the governor is also proposing a new categorical, which is the Title I School Recognition Program. In the prior year, when the teacher compensation program was implemented, the school recognition program was eliminated as a way to help kind of fund that new teacher compensation program. And so now he's proposing a new one, but then it's limited to just Title I schools. Looking at our required local effort, it does appear, we don't have all the information yet, that the governor may be holding or considering holding the RLE constant or proposing to hold it constant year over year. But it is also possible that that increase in the RLE is really just related to the increase in new construction. So as we get more information, we'll be able to determine, really what is he proposing to do with the required local effort with that millage rate.
Dr. Knus, can I ask a question? On the last slide, the money that the governor's putting in for the classroom teacher compensation, is that going to be enough to maintain the salary levels that we currently have with the increased, where we're currently at with the new teachers and the?
Yes, because it's maintaining and then increasing it another 50 million on top of it.
All right, thank you.
So looking at the funding per unweighted FTE, looking at the governor's proposal, he's proposing to increase the funding $243, which represents almost 3% in Palm Beach County. And then I mentioned that our enrollment total district-wide is going down 5,100 students, but that really is broken up between district-operated schools as well as charter, McKay, and family empowerment. So district-operated schools are projected to decline by 6,100 students, which right now we're down around 7,300 students. So we're looking at having an increase in students next year of about 1,200 to 1,500. Charter schools are in the same situation as the district. It looks like they're down from projected, but it's actually, they're actually up a little bit too if you compare them to their actual enrollment as of today. McKay and family empowerment are expected to increase, especially as what Mr. Burke presented, is if that voucher program were to be expanded, it could increase even more than what's anticipated. So the net increase in, net decrease in FTE is estimated right now at 5,100. So after you take into consideration the additional amounts that we're going to have to pass through to charter schools, McKay, and family empowerment, we're looking at going from just, kind of staying steady to a decrease of $7.3 million, which could have been much worse had there not been that increase in the BSA. And so that's why we're really looking forward to what the Senate and House proposals are going to be, because with that decline in enrollment, we could have a significant decline in revenue. But trying to be optimistic, we'll start with what we've got with the governor's budget. So we have a decline, a shortfall of 7.3 million. There's always more we have to consider. So Mr. Burke mentioned the increase in the FRS rates, which are going to range anywhere between 0.75% and 1.5%. We want to make sure we're being conservative. So right now we're putting in the impact that we had in the current year, which is 15.5 million. We also need to back out that increase in the Title I school recognition program and the teacher compensation program, because that's already earmarked and set aside for other purposes that we can't utilize. Since our revenue is staying pretty constant, the total funding is staying constant year over year, we don't really have to increase that much. It's a nominal increase to remain compliant with the board policy to set aside the 3% in the contingency reserve. That's only $100,000. We also have an increase in the instructional materials. And we mentioned at the last board workshop that the categorical that the state is funding us for instructional materials is just not keeping pace with the actual cost of the adoptions. And so we anticipate to have an increase or spend more than the categorical of an estimated $2 million in FY22. And we expect that to continue not only in 22, but also going into future years. Bless you. So. We also need to take into consideration the annualized impact of the salary settlements from the current year, from FY21, for those employee bargaining groups that were effective January 1st. So we have to make sure to get that full year of expense in there. So that's an additional $2 million. And then we do have a savings of $19.5 million to adjust the school budgets to align with the actual projected enrollment. And I'll get into a little more detail on that on the next slide. And then we also have, some of the unknowns that we have are those continuing costs related to COVID. And Dr. Shetfield and Mr. Oswald will be speaking more to that student academic support plan later today, but the additional programs that are going to be needed in order to address that learning loss. And so taking all of that into consideration, we started with a $7.3 million shortfall. We're at about $12.5 million shortfall. And considering that is really looking at the high water mark of the governor's proposal. So getting into a little more detail with the school budgets, Our FY22 school budgets are going to be released on February 22nd. There was no change to the allocation models. Everything was held the same. The only change that the principals will see is that their budgets are going to reflect and align with actual enrollment. So that will result in a decrease of approximately 320 positions, but we do anticipate that those positions will be absorbed just through normal attrition and vacancies, and to avoid any layoffs that we have. In addition, the HR department put in place a process several years ago that really helped to minimize the movement of teachers as a result of the adjustment of school budgets related to enrollment. And the schools are allowed to keep a certain number of teachers that are technically lost until the count day adjustment process, which is the 11th day of school, because what we found is that there are many teachers that may decide to retire or transfer, from the spring when we release the budgets all the way through the count day process. So this allows the schools to keep teachers on their site if there is a teacher that does decide to leave, and opens up a valid active position.
It also helps that sometimes the principals feel like their enrollments, they're more optimistic that the kids are going to come back, they're going to have a higher enrollment. This gives them, if they feel strong about that, this gives them the latitude to kind of keep positions above their budget to see how it plays out. And if the kids materialize in the fall, then we're good. If they do not, then we deal with it at the 11th day process.
And then looking at the budget challenges, this is very similar to what we presented at our last meeting. We still have the ongoing charter school referendum litigation that is still outstanding, and the concerns with property values. What is going to happen with commercial property values specifically is a concern at the state level as well as at the local level. With the student academic support plan, it's going to be broken up into 2 phases. So phase 1 is now through summer. There's 2 main programs, the tutorial and summer school program. We already had budgets set aside for the summer program of approximately $6 million. And so the estimated cost of expanding these 2 programs is $16 million, which is $10 million more than what we originally had budgeted. So we have $5 million remaining, or estimated to be remaining, in our COVID reserve. And then the additional $5 million would come out of that new ESSER 2 federal grant, which we expect that we'll be receiving within the next few months.
Yeah, and I just want to point out and you're going to hear much more from Mr. Oswald and Dr. Sheffield, but we know that going into this, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. With us addressing the learning loss, it's going to span years, not months. And I really appreciate their efforts to phase the initiatives, because phase 1, we've got a handle on these dollars. We know we can come up with the $10 million. Phase 2, we really need to see what happens with the state budget so that we can figure out what type of reduction we might have to weather, and then see what remaining ESSER dollars are left, to really be tapped to help deal with the learning loss. So I think this phasing of the initiatives really aligns well to the budget process, and it gives us more time to plan and develop those initiatives. So that's it. Our timeline has not changed. We're going to be, we said we'd have several workshops this year. We expect being in front of you almost monthly. We're working with your Budget Advisory Committee. We'll be meeting tomorrow morning. And this will carry through right until September 14th. We go for final budget adoption.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. I was just wondering, since this is a tentative budget from the governor, and we still have to wait and see what the legislation comes back with, at what point would we have to actually lose jobs? Because you said we could absorb the 323 in that year. How many jobs could we not absorb? What is the general number?
Well, we're working hard to avoid any type of layoff. And, the superintendent put a hiring freeze on back in March of 2020, right off the bat, when we saw, think we were in for a rough ride. So that's working to our advantage. We're being very careful the freeze was lifted from schools so they could, get back to serving the kids, but our departments are still under that freeze, and they have to go through a waiver process to fill any jobs. We're really gonna have to see those Senate and House budget proposals, and then that should give us an idea of like the high water mark and the low water mark, and then we'll have to wait until the party's conference at the bitter end to really know where we stand. I'm hoping that if we get a decent budget out of the state, that we can utilize the ESSER dollars in a way that maybe mitigate some of the shortfall. Like we may have staff that may have to be redirected. Maybe we can't afford to have them in their current job, but maybe that'd be a good person that could help us with addressing the learning loss. So there might be some shifting from the regular operating budget to the grant budget. And that's where we're going to have to really, I think, put our best thinking to it to try to avoid that type of job loss. Now, the ESSER dollars are going to play a major role in our budget next year, and those dollars cannot be tapped for salary increases. It's got to go to, it's a pretty long list of things you can do with the money, but salary increases is not one of them. So I think our focus will really be on trying to preserve jobs, putting people in the place where they can have the biggest impact on our students, and trying to preserve the jobs and just get the best return on investment with those federal dollars.
Can I ask one more question? On Senate Bill 48, how is that expansion happening? What is it that is causing, how will they expand that? I know you're saying there is some space in there for them to expand those programs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yes, so when those programs were first established, and it was fairly recent, right? I think it was 2019 with the Family Empowerment Scholarships, there was language that said they could grow like up to 7% of the state population, I think, each year. So that's already built into it. What this bill does is it makes the pool of potential applicants bigger because the income, you can now earn more money and be eligible for those scholarships. Okay. So we could see more growth there. It's kind of hard to predict. Kindergartners are eligible for that Family Empowerment Scholarship. So these are students that haven't even made it to us yet, and they can go straight to voucher, and we may never see that student for 13 years, So I think there's, that program is basically pretty close to hitting its cap. Whatever the legislature says, we're going to allow X number, the scholarships are taken. Wow. And we'll have to watch and see if they do anything to continue to raise that cap beyond the 7% that's already built in each year.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Brew.
Thank you. So I have two questions. The first one is for the superintendent. Clearly, student enrollment plays a key factor in our budget. When can we expect an update with specific numbers for the number of students that have come back after we've made this initiative? The second semester just began yesterday. When can we expect hard numbers on what we recouped?
We can give them to you now. Mr. Deputy Superintendent Oswald can give them to you.
Yes, for the number of students returning back to brick and mortar, we expect up to 15,000. Actual warm body as of yesterday, it was 10,000, approximately 76,000 kids in our brick and mortar. What parents have indicated through SIS, it could go up as high as 81,000. So we still have a good number of our students still in distance learning environment.
Thank you. And for my second question, and I'm not sure through the chair to the superintendent, I don't know who the best person is to answer this or to come back with information, but from my experience with the McKay Scholarship, most of the calls I get, the students utilizing the McKay are moving within our district. So can we get a number for the number of students that are using McKay to go outside the district and versus the number of students that are moving around our district with the McKay?
Yes, ma'am. We'll bring that back to the board in written form.
Mrs. Andrews.
And thank you, Mr. Burke and Heather. Have you heard any news about whether there may be some additional conversation in Tallahassee about the shopping on the internet where we can get some tax money? What's out there, and what have you heard about whether something might come forth this time around?
Yeah, I mean, I have seen that in different, articles around the state. That comes up, the taxing online sales, the Seminole Gaming Compact, which is, that's eluded them for several years now, but that's, these are big ticket items. The online sales could be, I think it was estimated over $500 million, along with the Seminole Gaming Pact. So hopefully the legislature will work at trying to bring some more revenue into the picture to avoid cuts. I can check with our lobbyist team to see if there's anything, tangible at this point, but all I've heard is kind of, I guess, hearsay that might be something that's happening.
And as we can see, everything looks pretty bleak right now based on where we are. One specific here, I love it that the schools could maintain up to 3 lost teachers in the protected subject areas until the 11th day count. And so that's everybody, but when you see some parts of the region where we know the students don't come back until after the 11th day count, I mean, is this for everybody, for the Glades in certain areas where you have migrant children coming back at certain times? Is there some adjustment for some of those particular schools, or is it across the board, everybody?
It's currently across the board, all schools up to 3 positions, regardless of size. It's worked very well. I got to give Dr. LaCava and his team credit, because that's something that has just provided that flexibility, and it allows the schools to kind of make common sense decisions sometimes and not force us to excess teachers, or in the spring when they have a pretty good idea that won't be necessary in the fall. So.
Go ahead, Mrs. Andrews.
Well, that's good that there's not a problem there, because I do know there are a great number of students coming back after the 11th day count. And then I worry because we're getting ready to look at summer school, and we're looking at what we need to do for tutorials. And we kind of do these kinds of things all the time. And it's going to have to look a lot different from what we've done in the past. So when we start talking about the pots of money to do the job that needs to be done for all these kids with learning loss, I just want to know, how is it going to be different from what we've had in the past as far as a pot of money, the time that's needed for getting these children back up and running for the summer, as well as for getting them ready for academic success? And how is that going to work out for us when we're going to have to hire more teachers? Because, I mean, summer school, we haven't had to hire a whole lot before, and we've been able to kind of maintain, but it's going to look totally different as we move forward to catch these children up. So will we have enough money to do what has to be done? I know you have the Voyager ELA curriculum materials using the CARES dollars, but you're going to need a real person, real people to help do what has to be done. Tell me how you see that looking.
Well, we're committing $10 million at this point, which is, it's a sizable investment with still a level of uncertainty about our funding, but I think it's necessary. We can't wait, to get started with this work. But we're still, phase 1, we're still going to be dealing with COVID. So as far as what the program will look like, I know we've had those conversations about the students, maybe getting tired of the same old routines and things like that. But I think it's a great segue to the next workshop with Mr. Oswald and Dr. Sheffield, because they can answer that question far better than I can in terms of programmatically how it may look different. For summer school, I think you touched on an important thing as well with just the capacity of our workforce. So we're basically doubling the size of our summer program. That assumes that we'll have double the number of teachers still ready, willing, and able to pitch in and come work over the summer to, they'll make a little extra money, but there's a possibility there that some teachers are really looking forward to the break. So I guess we'll have to see how that plays out. In the past, it's not been a problem. Usually those summer jobs are kind of coveted, but we'll have to see what the appetite is. And this will allow us, we get past today's workshops, this will allow us to start really implementing those programs and recruiting and getting the people signed up to work this summer. So I think we'll have to kind of just stay tuned.
Dr. Robinson?
Thank you, and thank you for spending time with me. When was it, yesterday?
Yeah, it was earlier this week.
I don't know, one someday, but anyway, thank you for that. And so Mrs. Brill's comment triggered something. I just need to check my memory banks. Were we held harmless are we getting the same amount of money for students in virtual as in brick and mortar at this point?
We are, thanks to the
Okay.
2 executive orders by the governor, but
Okay.
that is something I'm concerned about next year. If we still have this appetite for online learning, we need that type of flexibility, or we could see a 20% hit to our revenue for those kids.
Okay, and if I could follow up, has there been any signaling around that? Have we heard any whispers that the funding for virtual, for example, would be cut by 20% or whatever?
No,
Mike, if I
well,
could-
actually, I was on a call today with the Florida Finance Council, and that's something we were all talking about. And we have the DOE, like kind of high-level staff on the call, and all they could say at this point was that executive order expires June 30th. So there's nothing to hang our hat on at this point that we might have that type of latitude next school year. So it's something to probably, add to our list of legislative priorities, I think.
I would just add, I was going to say exactly what Mike said, but conversations are being had, but the answer is exactly what Mike said, is the executive order ends on June 30th. But even today, I whispered that to the governor, so we'll see.
So, but once that executive order ends, there's nothing, or is there something in place that would say that virtual would be funded less? It would take, as I remember it, it would take another executive order, another action to cut that funding. Am I misremembering?
Yeah, well, let me try. So virtual education is already less. The traditional Florida virtual or Palm Beach virtual, it runs about 80% of the student funding. And that's the way it's always been. And that has not changed during the pandemic.
Gotcha.
There is an option in statute called blended learning. And pre-executive order, we were looking at blending learning as thinking that might be a way for us to kind of have kids learn remotely and still get full funding. The read we got back from DOE is no, that's not going to cut it. And the executive order became critical to making that remote learning to allow that to be fully funded. So kind of, if we fall back, if kids fall back to just saying, well, I'm going to go to Palm Beach virtual, Florida virtual, then I expect they'd be funded like they've always had. And that there is a revenue loss to the district under that scenario. But I think what we may have is there's probably some families that are, comfortable with this remote online learning now, out of their home school with their same teacher from the home school, and they may want that to continue into the fall. So, depending on how fast the vaccine gets widely distributed, I don't think it's something we can take out of our arsenal, as far as innovative options for our kids.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Burke. Dr. Knus?
Thank you.
Mr. Superintendent?
Yes, sir. Mr. Oswald and Dr. Sheffield are presenting an update to the board around the implementation of our student academic support plan. The board has previously communicated the sense of urgency around addressing what we've come to all call the COVID slide, while simultaneously recognizing the disparities in student achievement that existed pre-COVID. It has been almost 1 year since COVID turned the entirety of K-12 education on its head. But in that time, the district has made significant progress with respect to bridging the digital divide, tightening up our scope and sequence, and providing an extensive array of innovative professional development opportunities for school-based staff and supervisors. We also secured approval from the Florida Department of Education for both our fall 2020 and spring 2021 optional innovative reopening plans. Our CAO and Deputy Superintendent have been working together in lockstep over the last several months to ensure schools have the support needed to counteract student learning loss in the face of unprecedented challenges. Today, you'll hear more about how the district is codifying all these efforts by way of the Student Academic Support Plan. However, I want to reiterate that the work focused on closing instructional gaps has been happening at the school, region, and central office level since school first closed on March 13th of 2020. As part of today's presentation, Mr. Oswald and Dr. Sheffield will share important updates on the plan's development and work to date, including a timeline that shares when the board can expect additional updates concerning ongoing implementation. I will now turn it over to Deputy Superintendent and CAO for today's workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fenoy, and good afternoon, board members. It's great to be here to talk to you about our core business and how we educate our students and really address the issue around our achievement gaps. We've been addressing this for years. It's nothing new to us, but we know with COVID that these gaps have exacerbated, and it's important to make sure that we address this quickly. We're in a unique opportunity because of COVID to really retool our school system around tightening up how we serve our kids during the regular school day and then through extended school day. And as Mr. Burke and Ms. Knus said, working cross departments, not just with them, but through the operations team, how do we ensure a robust system going into the summer? So just to take you back, Dr. Fenoy mentioned that we did close schools back in March 13th of 2020. And since that day, we began working on addressing our students' needs. Through that, this past summer, Dr. Sheffield, her team, has been working on major improvements in our distance learning work. Our plan was approved August 12th by the state to offer distance learning opportunity for our students, and the board took the decision to delay the opening of school to August 31st with a September 21st of actual brick and mortar for our students. We know in that distance learning environment, it's been a challenge for our students. Some students thrive in that environment, however, some do not. And then just this past December 30th, our innovative learning plan for the spring was approved. And back in November, Dr. Sheffield, myself, began the work of not only identifying what we're doing for our core instruction and that work, but how do we begin interventions to support our students. Today, we have 3 major goals to get through. Really review and start with the data. What does that look like at the national level, but also here locally? And then the challenges that we've been addressing to improve our distance learning support system. Then we'll get into how do we identify those students that need additional support, and what does that work look like to really make sure that they're being matched up with the right interventions. And then finally, getting into our immediate next steps from here to summer of how we can extend our learning opportunities for our students. Back in April, about a month after we closed for schools, NWEA conducted a study looking at typical learning loss that happened in summer. We always talked about the summer learning loss, but then layered in projections of COVID learning loss. Projected anywhere from 5 months to a year's worth of student learning loss could have happened from up until last June. When students returned, whether it was in a distance learning environment in our country or brick and mortar, what they did find, NWEA does administer assessments through different districts throughout the country. What they found in reading is that students either remain flat or some minor learning loss in reading. But math was a remarkable difference of about 5 to 10 percentile drop in mathematics. A lot attributed that because that math is very sequential and how students learn math, that we see bigger learning loss. Another report that we looked at, the McKinsey report, looked at Curriculum Associates iReady data, which is also administered throughout the United States. What they found in this was similar patterns. Students typically learned about in reading, 87% of what they typically would learn in the fall, to math, approximately 67%. That layers into about 2 to 3 months of learning loss in math and about a month to 2 months in literacy. However, when they looked at schools that served populations, a majority of students of color, the gaps were exacerbated by another month to 3 months for those particular students. So how does that play out here in Palm Beach County at the local level? At the beginning of the school year, we administered the diagnostics to the same cohort of students as they progressed to the next grade level. We saw similar patterns, so this is just one snapshot of English language arts where students remain somewhat consistent to where they left off. However, when we controlled for students of color and free reduced lunch, the gap slightly widened. In math, it was more pronounced, similar to what we saw at the national level. Last week, we finished our winter diagnostics, which we have begun to analyze. We are seeing those gaps definitely exacerbated and more learning loss occurring in our students. So it's a particular priority for us to make sure that we're intervening now. The McKinsey report also looked at different school districts and how school districts had opened and what type of projected learning loss could occur up to June of 2021. And typically, and with our model, where we're offering both distance learning and brick and mortar, some districts, are still completely in distance learning. The gaps are larger, but in our type of environment, an average of 6 months, but for students of color, it could be up to 8 months of learning loss. Thus, the importance of this particular workshop and that we intervene very quickly and address these particular issues. So it did start back in March. What did we do? Many of you know we quickly got to a 1-to-1 student device ratio, handing those out at our schools. Our smart boards, if you've been into some of our schools, are now in every single classroom. Do you want to shout out to our voters? This is your penny sales tax at work. These have been particularly worth a lot of ROI as we're using those in the distance learning environment. the Wi-Fi Warrior Initiative, really building on our technology trailblazers to really enhance this environment for distance learning. So many partners came to the table to ensure that we would be not only with devices, but that our students could actually connect to the internet by providing Wi-Fi hotspots, et cetera, to ensure that we were ready. The instructional variation was also a priority. Dr. Sheffield and her team quickly looked at the standards to look at the high impact, revised scope and sequences, and we pushed those out to the schools across all content areas to ensure that students were focused on the most important work due to the challenges of teaching an environment that combines both simultaneous teaching. And with simultaneous teaching, a lot of professional development has been pushed out. Our trailblazers really took the lead at our schools to really show it's not atypical to go into a classroom and see a teacher with multiple devices, one over on the wall, a smartboard, one in her hand or his hand, and really enhancing and engaging our students in this distance learning environment. Mental health has played a major toll on our students and everyone through this pandemic. We have been well equipped, again, thanks to our voters and our referendum, having behavioral health professionals, having co-located services, our new website, support systems from the central office to address our student needs. We continue to identify students on a daily basis and work with those particular students that need additional support. Our numbers continue to go up about those students wanting additional support. Student engagement, this same team also has been working around finding those students that never showed up. Mr. Burke in a previous workshop talked about our enrollment a couple months back being down 7,000 students. At that time, there were about 3,300 students. We didn't know where they were. That number is now down to 1,375. A lot of the students, what we have found, have either gone out of state, another district in Florida, homeschool, private school, many, unfortunately, some of our students even had to get a job and help bring money into the household. So we're looking at innovative ways. A number of those students we've also been able to find and actually get them back enrolled in our schools. And we're continuing to drill down for this, the other 1,300 till we get down to zero so we know exactly where every single student is. Our struggling learners was a big part of our work as we finished up the first quarter last year and started to see some of our students with the increase in number of Fs that our students were getting to try to really get more of our students back into brick and mortar in a more optimal environment to instruct our students. And as I just mentioned, we've got about approximately 10,000 more of our kids coming in, not quite as many as we anticipated. So we're going to continue to this priority to really improve the current environment of those remaining in distance learning. Before we move into this next phase 2, I want to see if there's any questions that you have on this first chunk of information on our goal around the national, local landscape and our challenges to date.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you, Mr. Oswald and Dr. Sheffield. Now, for those students who are still out there that's unaccounted for, did you say it was 1,300? What was that number?
Approximately 1,300.
And what are we doing to try to find them?
So there is a team in the Safe Schools Department that every evening are making phone calls, trying to track them down, going to homes, just doing detective work. And they found, they're finding students every single day. So they're continuing that every day after school hours to really locate those. So a good number of them are now back enrolled in school, and we're going to keep going until we find every single one.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. I'm so glad to see this. I've also actually had an opportunity. Yesterday I spoke to Mr. Howard about some of this data, and so it's so nice that I've had some quality time to spend with it. Last night I actually presented some of the data to the city of Delray, and the mayor asked me a question on how we were comparing with the rest of the country. And so I was able to say, some of the things that we're doing well, but I'm hearing from you that we're pretty much on trend with the rest of the country, which is what I had anticipated. But I did notice in some of the data that we had some outliers of schools that were doing better than others and some that were doing worse. Do you have any indication on what impacts that when we are doing a little bit better in some of the schools? How is that happening?
Yeah, so based on the mid-year diagnostics, that's the work we're doing right now. So where the schools who are improving more, are there certain practices that we can scale up as a system, is currently what we're doing. Obviously, our struggle right now, the more students that are actually in brick and mortar definitely helps to engage students who are struggling. However, one of the things we've been trying to improve since day one is student engagement. So where students are engaging more passively, how do we engage them actively? So how do you, in an environment that you're teaching kids both in a simultaneous, do the same type of pedagogy is more challenging for our teachers. They've done a good job, but it's difficult. So that's the work we're trying to scale up now.
Well, can I follow up too? I just was wondering, would it make sense for this year, as we're scheduling, for the teachers who are teaching virtual students to be teachers that are virtual? Does that make a difference if they can all be one form or the other? Would that actually help, or are you not seeing that?
Yeah, a lot of that has bubbled up organically from school to school. A lot of principals have been working with teacher teams. Some teachers, depending on a grade level, a team, have talked about, let me take all the kids that are virtual and I'll work them this way. In some situations, I'd prefer to take all the brick and mortar. In some, they didn't want to do that because they wanted to have fewer kids in the classroom and able to have greater social distancing occurring, and they preferred to do the simultaneous teaching. So we tried to work together with the teachers at school by school, class by class.
So as we go forward this year, that's also going to be into consideration for our teachers?
Well, I think part of the previous conversation, I think there's going to be a lot of unknowns when we go into next school year. The executive order, as said earlier, will expire. Would we even have that option? How much that vaccine gets out? Those are a lot of questions that we're going to have to watch closely. But to your point, we're definitely what we've learned and which practices are the best for student achievement, we're going to have to look at so that if we are given the option, that we roll those out. In fact, I was just talking to a representative from University of Florida who was funded a major grant to study this kind of work about which practices are best in this type of environment.
That's awesome. Thank you.
If I could just add for the board, so I have instructed the academic team to keep building and improving our distance learning model as if it's going to be here next year. So until we're told that we cannot do it, we will continue to improve those practices, because I go to schools every single Friday. And when I tell you our teachers they are figuring this thing out, and some of them have become very good at this thing. And so we already know that some families prefer this mode of instruction. So until we're told that we can't do it, we're going to keep building our program to make it as best as we can.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you. And my question is on the mental health piece. And I do know that we have the counselors and mental health counselors in the schools and the guidance counselors. And the last time I was out there, I remember them telling me they're just so overloaded with people. There's so many students that truly need help. Now, is there a way, if someone's having an issue, that if they can't get to a counselor, they can go online and get some help from somebody? How does it work here in Palm Beach County?
Well, we still have the access with the 211 with our local organizations to where they can go. And we do have our Caring First website that has all that information. So if our families cannot get to a counselor, say on our school campuses or our school campuses are closed, it directs them to our 211 site that we have available.
Now, that's just a 211 site for the county, for anybody.
For the county, for anyone, but we also have, during our instructional day, they should be able to immediately have access to our mental health professionals that are on our campuses.
And
between the mental health professionals, our guidance counselors, our behavioral health professional members, it's just so many other resources there on the campuses to where we all should be hitting hard at this. And as I move into the next part of this, Ms. Andrews, you will hear me talk about, that single school culture piece around, we can't just look at the academics, But we have to look at that SEL component, to your point, around the mental health, around, the discipline, to where we are making certain that we are encompassing the whole child, because that is so important. And that's why, we really want to really beef up in regards to the work that we're doing with our mental health professionals and those behavioral health professionals that are on our campuses. Because if our students are not doing well, we have to dig deep and try to understand and figure out why they're not doing well. Because at times, it's not always the academics because they don't understand the work. There could be other contributing factors. And in this space, I'm sure that there are some other contributing factors in regards to why our students or our families may be having some difficulties.
Let me follow up, Mr. Barbieri. And thank you. And I was looking at some of the sites. I just heard the other day that Broward has an app out there, and I don't know, maybe we have something like that, but could you kind of check it out where if a student is having some difficulty with mental health, they can use this app to get some necessary support and assistance, and they thought that had been pretty successful. Because that is going to be one of the biggest things that we're dealing with. As you know, we're dealing with it now, and it's not going to get any better. So could you check on that app? Maybe we have something equivalent. I know
Definitely will.
I know the 211, but I'm not talking about that. This seems like this was specifically for that school district for a child who may need some additional support.
I definitely will, and I'll follow up to see how it's connected to our Caring First site that have all of our agencies that we work with as well, alongside with our families.
Dr. Robinson?
So thank you. I'm going to start with the nice part. So the nice part is that, and I want to thank Mr. Oswald for having conversations with me about how we answered exactly that question, how young people know who they can reach out to. And he actually came up with some very, I thought, very good ideas in terms of making sure, you can speak for yourself, I don't need to.
Sure, I remember which conversation.
Okay, I'll tell you which part I'm thinking about. So
Yeah.
the part about making sure that it's like on the Google Classroom, so that whenever a child logs on, the behavioral health professional for their school is like there with their Google number, so that the child can reach out to their assigned behavioral health professional. And we also talked about different ways of sending that message to young people that we are here to help should you need help, right? So that they don't have to look high and low to find that information. But now here's the not so nice part, and I can't. This is just bugging me. On these slides with this data, with these spotlight on the diagnostic, please help me understand why you clump together free and reduced lunch Black and Hispanic students instead of disaggregating the data. If you're going to show us data, I think we can handle disaggregated data, right? So why do we clump that together like that?
So this is just a snapshot. If you go on this actual site, you can manipulate this data in so many different ways. English language learners, you can control by school, ESE students. This was just to mirror what we saw in the McKinsey report, that the data here is mirroring what's happening at a national.
Okay, I thought we were past that, but okay. And then on this, the one, which is a very interesting slide with the dots that show the learning loss. Can you help me understand this? Because it says the source is online charter school study 2015. Then it also references some census data in 2020. So I'm just a little bit confused as to what that actually is. Would you tell me again? I know it says something about iReady, but I just...
So the data that they used to analyze to make this type of projections was the iReady diagnostic assessments, based on what they typically saw in their learning loss, projecting that out, layering in with what they saw happen in the fall and what potentially could occur up until June, depending on the type of implementation a school district has for their learning environment. So a school district that is completely remote and all distance learning, the learning loss projections are higher versus a district like ours, which is more of a hybrid. Some of our kids are brick and mortar, some are in face-to-face, or some are distance learning. So our hybrid approach at improving that, these are projected potential learning loss by June of 2021 if we don't improve interventions and support, which is the next part of the presentation.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. I think there's something that's still glitching in my brain about understanding that, but the
And
other piece.
each of the references here, there's an appendix of all the different, one of the things the board requests in the past, references on what we're using. So
Okay.
there's, which you can link onto to get more detail, and we can go over 101 to look at
Okay.
that particular piece.
Okay. But in that reference, they clump together students of color.
Yes.
They should be shamed. Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews?
And thank you, and you may be getting ready to talk about this, but we do have the data within the district of those teachers who truly know how to move student achievement. And so when we begin to kind of look at this learning loss and these pool of students being in different places, some schools have more work to do than others, and you're trying to build a pool for tutoring, for the summer school, are you going to be kind of trying to recruit some of this talent that you already have, not just depend on the teacher that's really right sitting at the school that may not? So tell me how that works.
Yeah, so when we look into the summer, we'll talk about that in kind of goal 3. We can talk more, but absolutely we want to recruit those teachers who we know are making a difference in student achievement, and also looking at a variety of hybrid, not knowing what summer is going to completely look like. There are some students who may, and families who still prefer to stay in a distance learning environment. We'll have to have a hybrid approach. So those teachers who have demonstrated particular expertise of moving student achievement in a distance and learning environment. So yes, absolutely, we'll be looking at those particular pieces.
No other questions? You want to continue, Mr. Oswald?
Okay, I'll turn over to Dr. Sheffield, who'll go into talk about our focus group work and the piece around interventions.
Okay, well, again, good afternoon. But as Mr. Oswald has just shared the purpose of our student academic support plan, these next steps, what we're going to, next slides, I should say, we're going to take a look at the process for identifying our students, and most importantly, talk about the framework that we're going to be utilizing when providing support, the interventions for the students in which we are indeed targeting. Because as we work together and leverage the support, what we've came to realize is that it doesn't matter in regards to how many resources we may have, how much dollars Mr. Burke may say that it's available. What's going to be important is the implementation and the fidelity of what we do with what we already have. And as we dig deep and we peel back the layers and working together as a team, we've just made a very strong commitment in regarding to looking at and reassessing what we were already doing and answer the question as the adults, were we really doing it to fidelity to where we can say that it's making a difference in regarding to, our student advancement. So, and with that, we then talk about, now that we know what we want to do, how we want to do this work, let's talk about leveraging the support, from some key stakeholders. So what we realize is that this academic support plan is not a plan that could be held, say, with the Deputy Superintendent, Chief of Staff, or even with the Office of Academics. This is going to take the work of everyone here district-wide. So we had an opportunity to where we shared, we met with, HR because of the human capital piece. To Mrs. Andrews' point, you talked in regards to the staffing and making certain that when we were identifying the teachers that's going to be working with, our students that we are finding that are in such need and needing those some core interventions, how are we going to do that? How would we accommodate the staffing of such? We also met with, Mr. Burke, of course, with the finance piece, with the dollars, but also Mrs. Paul, as it pertains to school food service, transportation. So the list just gone on. And we had an awesome day, I have to say, on January 8th, when we really spent an entire day working with our principal supervisors and talking about the academic support plan and the why, and how it's going to take, district staff, teaching and learning, everyone from curriculum coming together, listening at our principal supervisors, peeling back the layers in terms of what is it that we are already doing, what's working, what's not working. So in leveraging, that kind of support, we were able to set the criteria for determining our students' priority groups, and you're going to see that in just a minute. And then also talk about, once we have identified the students and look at the thresholds in regards to what exactly is it that we're going to be targeting that's going to help identify the students, then what are the interventions? What kind of interventions? But when you talk about the interventions, most importantly, what are the resources that we have within our district? And do we have resources that would target the necessary interventions that will be desired for the specific group? And then lastly, we went into talking about the implementation timeline. What will indeed that looks like? So as we move on, and when we work together and we talked in regards to the setting the criteria for the identification of the students in phase 1 of the student academic support plan, and this took us several meetings. It took us some time to get there because we were deliberate and intentional in regards to the data and the collection pieces that we wanted. And we wanted to make certain that we were trying to, of course, target our students and be transparent with the data in regards to what we were trying to accomplish. So here, what you're going to see there are 4 areas in which we came up with, and it was around the engagement. It was around, and of course, with the engagement, someone asked a question earlier in regarding to those students, 1,300 students that we are still trying to identify that have not yet made contact. So that's what that engagement piece comes with, and there are some other bullets there. Then, of course, another piece of that will be around ELA, the English language learners. English language arts. And then we went on to talk about our math. So then you have your reading, you have your math, and then those other academic pieces, those other academic components tend to make me want to think of our SEL components, such as I talked earlier in regarding to, not just about the academics, but what are those other factors that could be contributing to why the students may not be performing well and having some difficulties. So from that particular slide, where you saw in regards to those 4 big buckets, then when we go on to this next slide here, what you're going to see over to my left, you're going to see still that box that talks about engagement comes down. You're going to see the language arts, the math, and the other academics. Now in the center there, you're going to see the factors and the matrices. What that means is that we then looked at each student that fell into each of these categories. When we identified and we looked at each student that fell into these categories, that's how those students were identified. There you have from elementary, from middle to high, and you will tell how we were identified. So if you look over, and I'll just going through an example for you. If you look for elementary, you will see those first columns there came all the way down for I to where it stopped at I ready. Over in middle and high school where it says NA, meaning not applicable, that means I ready is not being utilized in our elementary schools. And it will be the same thing when you come back over to language arts at that bottom there where it talks about grade 12. Of course, that's not an elementary in middle, just to give you a glimpse in regards to how we are reading this data. What you're not going to see, which is very important here, because you're probably saying, this is all great, but how do we get to the students? When we're working together as a team, what you're not going to see, if we peel back this data, it's going to immediately give me the school, and it's going to tell me the number of students that falls into each of these categories. When I peel back another layer, it's actually going to identify the student by name and by the area in which they're needing some additional support. That's how granular we have drilled down in regarding to identifying the students with these matrices.
Dr. Sheffield, ask you a question, and maybe you covered this. I stopped at a couple of elementary schools and I met with a couple first grade teachers. And in a couple of the schools, they told me some of the kids who came in at first grade, since they'd missed half a year of kindergarten, some of these kids don't know how to pronounce how the letters are supposed to be, sounds they make. They can't read sight words. They're definitely not ready to move on to second grade. How are we identifying those children that are, I can't see us pushing these children forward into second grade and trying to get the second grade teachers to make up a whole year of what these kids didn't get because they're not even nearly ready to read. So I don't see anything on the chart that talks about first graders. It all seems to be third grade and up. So what are we doing to identify the children in first grade that really need a lot of help, and maybe that help is not pushing them forward into second grade, but having the parents agree to retain them?
And then when you come down to the other academics area and where it talks about, say, kindergartners, of course, is flickers. And then when it comes down saying one or more ND, that meaning that they're not, not developing, they're not on grade level, they're having some deficiency there. That's where we're going to capture that with our first and second graders.
Okay.
So we will be capturing that data.
Okay.
And
Good.
writing.
Okay.
Mrs. Andrews, then Vice Chair Breaux.
Thank you, and this is going to take a lot of communications with the parents, because when we look at this chart, some of these children are failing, but some of them may not be. They just may be behind and may not need to go to total summer school. So what is the plan of action? Because we're getting close to the end of the year. You think you're just in February, but it'll be over with. And parents need to know, we kind of knew exactly how and what we would do if you had to go to summer school. But when you look at this, some of these children may be in one of these or might be in two of these, maybe,
Yes.
and then some of them may be retained, but a lot of them may not be. So how does this work? So parents will know that it's going to mean a different lifestyle for them this summer based on these pieces that you put in this profile here.
Well, Ms. Andrews, what we're doing is that one component is that, we have progress reports that's going out this month in a few weeks, right? Then in March, of course, it's report cards or what have you. What we're going to Executive Cabinet with on Monday is that we've developed another layer of a progress report that's aligned much better to our current standards that we're going to be utilizing once we go through Executive Cabinet and get the approval of everyone to agree, that we would want to utilize to help teachers where we could better explain to parents in regards to the deficiency that the child may be having. And so once doing that, it's really going to be very important, and we can't just put all of this on the school site because they're not going to be able to, continue to make all of the contact, but we're going to have to assist the schools in terms of contacting and having these conferences with the parents and to get the parents to understand how crucial this is. And so I'm going to come back to your question because what it is tied to what we're talking about right now, to your point. When you look at this particular slide here, like based on the data points and what we said that we would use to identify our students, if you come all the way over to the right where you see that 51,658 that's highlighted, that means we have 51,658 students that are needing support in this district that are in both ELA and math. That's a lot of students. When we come back over, then if you go all the way back over to the left, then you can go back all the way over to the left where it says elementary, then you will be able to see, well, how many needed an engagement? How many needs it in elementary middle school and high school by each area? That's what that means there. So in elementary, we have 3,492 of those students that will need support in that area of engagement. When we come over to language arts, it's 38,687, which is right at 51% of our elementary students. Then when you come to math, you will see the 27,322. It's important for me to say again, some of the students could be duplicated, meaning that they are in more than one area. And so we realize when we see this kind of numbers that we're going to have to put together a massive effort in trying to identify and work with our families and let them know how critical the needs are.
Go ahead, Ms. Sanders, follow.
I like that, Dr. Sheffield, because some of the children have been behind before now. COVID has just made it worse. And now that we have, I know the 10 million that Mr. Burke talked about for summer school to do things differently, we probably need more than that when we kind of look at these numbers here and all the children that are in trouble. But I think we're going to have to start educating the parents early on that they probably knew that their children were behind or someone didn't graduate or didn't pass the FSA and been working through all these pieces here. And so it's just needs to be a communications piece and helping them to know that we're lasering in on some of these things that have been there, but now they've gotten worse because of remote learning, because of COVID, and this is the action plan, and they need to kind of stay tuned because a plan is being developed based on the need of the children that's at least more strategic than ever before because we know it's getting worse. So I just wondered how that piece, because it's a lot of work to do that.
It is, and and I think that's why it is so important. And Mr. Oswald and we are working very closely together because the work definitely intertwines. Because when he started with the Make Your Choice, and now that we're on the Make Your Choice 3.0, and what we realized that going into starting second semester on yesterday, that when you're talking about our students that are that are not meeting proficiency, and we would like for them to return to brick and mortar, we're finding that based on the data points that you just saw, there were about 18,578 students that would have received letters indicating that we would like for them to return from distance learning to brick and mortar because of such. And out of that number, we had about 6,100 of those families had committed to returning to brick and mortar. So when we realized that when we're collecting the data, now what are we going to do with it? And that just means that we're going to have to make all of our efforts in continuing to work with the families that they understand. So as Mr. Oswald will talk about this when he go into the next steps, once I'm done here, in regards to what are our next steps, how we're going to plan for this, we're saying that we're providing, the interventions, this additional intense support for our students in brick and mortar, but what does that support look like, or what are we doing for our students that's going to continue in distance learning? Because just because the families decided that they're not comfortable sending them back to brick and mortar, we still, with unconscious effort, have to figure out how do we develop a robust plan to work with those students that are still in distance. We know the support that they gauge will be much better for us if they return to brick and mortar, but we will have to just continue to work and do our very best with that.
Vice Chairwoman Brew.
Thank you. And I was going to save this comment till the end, but because of Mr. Barbieri's comments and Mrs. Andrews regarding retention, the elephant in the room is school retention, and I want to make sure my colleagues are aware that Senator Berman filed Senate Bill 200, which states that it's a bill that will allow parents to choose to retain his or her K-12 public school student in the grade level that they're in, and all it requires is for the superintendent to receive the request by June 1st, and then that student would automatically be retained, and that's going to have huge budgetary consequences for us. I think it's something that we really need to stay on top of. We need to ask Ron LaFace and Capital City Partners to monitor that bill. I know I spoke to Mr. Tierney, and he indicated there's a concern that we have that some parents might use it for sports to retain their children because they would be, larger than other, students, and because high school sports are so competitive. I would hope that wouldn't be the motivation, but this is a bill that's really going to have a huge impact on us. So I think that we need to be able to pivot and look at that. Although we don't want to talk about that, we're talking about helping them with their academic progress. But if we could please keep track of that bill, because it totally impacts this.
Ms. Brill, I had the privilege of speaking to Senator Berman about it and the Commissioner of Education, so we are on top of it.
Okay. Well, now that we've identified, we talked about the purpose of why we need to do this, academic support plan. We've looked at the target areas. We've looked in regards to those data metrics that we would utilize, that we've utilized in terms of identifying our students. This chart here and what you're seeing, you're actually seeing a snippet of the chart in which we're utilizing. Up top there is a link, and this is a working document that we utilized when we met with principal supervisors on January 8th. And we are continuing to utilize this document. And what we're doing is that we are actually taking this document here, and we're listing every single resource, available resource that is being utilized here within our district. Then we're going back from listing the resource to talk in regards to what's most appropriate in regards to which resource is most appropriate for providing interventions for particular areas. Then we take it a step further in talking about, is it working or is it not working for the betterment of our children? Because what we do know is that the support must look different and it has to be differentiated. This plan is not going to be a one-size-fits-all because we know all of our students have different needs. So we're going to definitely have to differentiate in regards to how the support and what is utilized, how it is looking. What will not be, what will be, I should say, non-negotiable will be the actual framework, how we're going to be providing the support and the intervention. So this is a piece that principal supervisors are working very closely with us on. Why principal supervisors? Is because they are so close to working and on the ground and working with our school centers, and they're the ones that are out there, working closely with our principals and having conversations with teachers in regarding to what's working, what's not working, and what kind of support it is that they would need. As you recalled when I first started, it's not about the resource and the dollars that would be given to us. It's all about the implementation and the effectiveness of the adult behavior, including myself. I always include myself in this, but the behavior of the adult in regards to what we're doing with what we already have to fidelity and assisting our teachers, our students, and what have you. And I will be able to share that with you if you would like to see. And so once we have identified and looked in regards to the resources that are available and those that we have identified as a team that we would be utilizing for specific interventions, for specific skills or what have you, as we're differentiating and working with our students, our schools, and so forth, then we will come back and we then talk about, well, what is the framework that we're going to be holding tight in regarding to these kind of support being provided. This is not new. This is something that we already utilize within our system around the MTSS model, the multi-tiered support system. We all know that it's a proven continuous improvement framework for our student success. We have an MTSS, very strong MTSS support team here that's led by Lisa Roble. What we're going to do and are committed to doing is just making certain that we are continuing to providing the ongoing support for our teachers, for our principals, our school-based leaders, the principal supervisors, myself, Mr. Oswald. We all actually went through this again on January 8th because, again, for us to be able to provide the support and talk about holding tight and being committed to, if we're saying that this is the framework that we're going to be utilizing, and we want to really and truly track to see if the intervention and the resources that we're using to attack that intervention, is it really working? Then we have to really do it to fidelity. It's very hard to make a determination if something is working or if it's not working if you do not do it to fidelity to where it's monitored effectively. And with that being said, then we will go on to talking about the level of support. And I talked in regards earlier around, the single school culture piece, that it's just not, and we talk about the academics, it is so important. But when we're focusing on the academics, there are so many other areas in regards to why our students may not be performing well or having difficulty. That is why it is so important that we be inclusive in including everyone that are involved to make certain that we are focusing on the whole child. Because if we do not focus on the entire child, we're going to be missing the mark. And that in working on the whole child, we're going to talk about the academics, but again, why? Is it something that's happening, through the SEL pieces? Is it something behaviorally that we're needing to provide support to? That's going to help encompass and close that gap. And then once we have done that, it is very easy to then talk about those 4 steps in regarding to really and truly moving the mark here. We've identified the problem. We know what the problem is. Now, why is this problem is occurring? Then if we've answered those 2 questions, what are we going to do about it? And what we're going to do about it is providing that support and digging deeper. And then once we're providing that support, which is that intervention, at what point do we stop to see if it's working? If it's not working, then we need to go back and revisit to see what is it that we need to do differently. This framework and this model that we're talking about, it's going to work for some students. Some students, it may not work for, and we may need to do something differently.
Dr. Sheffield, Mrs. Whitfield has a question.
Just really briefly, when you're talking about monitoring, how often do you anticipate making a change in the students' programming to make sure that they're doing well? And how often will you be doing that needs, not making adequate progress reporting? How often do you go back and look at the students to change their programs, and how often are you going to redo those numbers, that calculation?
Well, that will lead into this, Mrs. Whitfield, because along utilizing that MTS framework, this is an example. I could have put it in here. This is elementary. I could have put the same in here for middle school and high school, and I could have put it in here also for math, but we would be here for a few hours. So I put a sample in here. So we would go through all of these core pieces. And once we have gone through, these core pieces, and as we meet weekly, Mr. Oswald meet weekly with Mr. Oswald and the principal supervisors, these are the conversations that we would have to follow up in terms of talking about the students that we've identified and how things are working. And if it's not, then we know that there's a cycle, right? And we know that interventions take anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks. So we have to, just keep that in mind. But at the same time, within that 6 to 8 weeks time, there still should be some form of monitoring and checkpoints in between that 6 to 8 weeks.
When do you come back to us with the data on how well the whole system is doing, if it's working at all?
At the end, I'm going to go through a timeline, and we're going to come back to the board
Thank you.
and have regular check-ins.
Great, thank you.
And then this slide here, as I'm wrapping up, Mr. Oswald is pushing me on. In this slide here, as we're wrapping up, again, was an example in regards to, that MTSS, the framework, and as we are, and I talk about a lot around the fidelity and us being committed to this and what that looks like. And we all know, we talk about it, this is reading, but, math, science, social studies is no different. And, when we talk about the core, that core instruction is for everyone. Everyone gets that core instruction. But even within that core instruction, we know that our instruction has to be differentiated within that whole group. And then once we see to where our students are having some difficulties or what have you, this is where we're talking about that Tier 2 intervention. And then we will go on for those that are having issues within the Tier 2 intervention, we go to more an intensive intervention. Our Tier 2 interventions, we would find to where it could be happening within the school day. They're pulled outside of that, outside of that reading block, outside of that core block or what have you. Then when we go into talking more of an intensive intervention, those interventions could have been, before school, if the school is having before school tutorial, or even after school. We have some of our schools that are doing things a little differently, even with Saturday school. We are in this blended space to where we're providing, right now, many of our schools are providing some additional support, brick and mortar, after school tutorial in brick and mortar, after school tutorial through distance learning. What we do know, and I do not want to get in regards to exactly what that process will look like, because some of that's going to come into phase 2, is that the support in which we're providing, it's going to have to look different in terms of what we have done in the past. What's going to be held tight is the framework that we're going to be utilizing. And that framework is that MTSS model, which is a proven framework for ensuring student success, those students that are indeed having difficulty. And this, again, nothing new to us here in the district. It's just something that we really have to step back and say that we want to revisit, we want to onboard again, and we want to hold it tight. And as we talk about the fidelity and the monitoring piece, Mr. Oswald and I, we talked about it, and this is what we are wanting to do, then what are some of the priorities? What are some of the things that we want to, really revisit and make sure that is happening? And when you look at the core priorities, we're going to have to make sure that we're continuing as a district to prioritize, teaching of the high impact standards, working with our teachers. Some of our teachers that are doing a phenomenal job. There are teachers out there that are really and truly, they're needing that additional support. So we really have to then work with, the curriculum team and to see how we are aligning our support and making certain that we are out there supporting our teachers, those that we see that are still having a very difficult time in this distance learning platform. And not just distance learning, but in brick and mortar. Because at many times we talk about the SEL needs of our students, but we are finding we need to provide that same kind of support to our teachers and our district staff as well. And of course, continuing to monitor the scope and sequence and tightening up instruction across all of our schools. And the schools have just been really great. This was the year that, Dr. Fenoy made a commitment and said that it's non-negotiable that all schools would follow the district scope and sequence. All of our district scope and sequence, it is all tied to standards. It is all tied to the formative and summative assessment. We also said that those formative and summative assessments would not be punitive. It will be to help us inform teaching and learning, engage in regards to where our students are, where are the instructional gaps. So when we gave and we're receiving the data back from our winter diagnostics, is it really and truly what we're wanting to see? Well, we want the truth, and we want to see where our students are so that we can provide a system to help close the gap. I think, Mr. Barbieri, you said it. This is not something that we're going to be able to fix over the summer. It's going to take some years for us to recover the loss from summer slide, from COVID-19, and from all other slides. This is going to take some time. So what we're doing here today, we want to share with you phase one of it, because we want to build a robust plan that's going to take us through and do our very best in regarding to continuing to close the instructional gaps that our students are facing. I wish I could sit here and say to you that we're going to do this summer, but we know that's not going to happen. But we want to put some things in place that's going to help.
So moving into so what we're talking about, this work is now through summer. We'll be coming in regular check-ins in a moment. I'll do a timeline of events that we'll be coming back to the board around the work ahead. So as Dr. Sheffield outlined, our goals and priorities right now in this phase one is to ensure that the quality of the school-based team process at each and every school are identifying the right kids and matching them up to the right intervention. That's a critical piece. And then matching up if those interventions are happening during the school day or if they're in need of additional extended learning time, which is a second priority that now through June that we're targeting the right students for after-school tutorials and doing very targeted tutorials, identifying specific skill gaps, specific standards to help address that, both in face-to-face or in a distance learning environment. And then as well is to enhance our current summer school program to really have a robust opportunity this particular summer that really addresses our high ROI areas in the areas of math, literacy, those needing additional support to ensure that they graduate on time or in need of cohort promotion based on discussed at this previous conversation. So I don't know about you all, but for the academic side of the house, if Mike Burke needs to wear a surgical mask to find us additional dollars, he can wear it all, even after he gets the vaccine, because we'll take the money. But we're very pleased of working closely with them to find this additional $10 million. and Ms. Knust outlined earlier, typically what we spend on a summer reading academy is approximately $2.5 million. So getting this influx of an additional $10 million, we're able to do some really good work and design some pretty robust opportunities for our students. We are going to be looking at this differently. So right now, our goal is to really design different pathways, different opportunities, depending on what the skill gap is of the student. So obviously what a senior needs to do to graduate on time is going to look different than what the first grader who doesn't know their sight words and can't pronounce the words. So how do we capture a program that really meets the individual student's needs and also addresses their social emotional learning? And also I do want to mention that through the CARES dollars, fortunately Ms. Knust was able to work with state officials on dollars that we couldn't use this past summer because we didn't offer face-to-face summer school, to actually purchase materials that will be able to support all of our elementary schools. So one of the programs, Voyager English Language Arts Curriculum, will be provided to every single elementary school as an additional resource. It also came out the #1 intervention program in our ELA adoption process. We're able to get that now and to support our schools with this additional resources, which will play into Mr. Barbieri's comment about children who are struggling. This program will help everything from phonics instruction to comprehension challenges. So moving forward, our goal is that today we're giving you this first phase 1 of the work to date and what we've been doing. We want to come back to the board in May to give you an update around what it looks like for summer school. How is this targeted tutorials been working out? So to your point earlier, Ms. Whitfield, are we seeing kids progress? Are we able to reduce that number at all and close those learning gaps? And then who specifically what that program is going to look for the summer. Then in July, as we move into phase 2, as things become more clear about what it looks like for next school year, our approach to opening, we'll begin to identify, again, what students still need additional supports. We know that the learning loss will still be there, and our approach to that work based on, as Dr. Fenoy mentioned earlier, what we've learned already. There's a lot of good things that we've learned that can be done with our students, our teachers' talent through the distance learning environment. And at this time, we gave you a lot of information. We'll go ahead and turn back over to Dr. Fenoy and to the board for questions.
Mr. Chairman?
Dr. Robinson, then Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you. So let me just go back to the focus groups. Were those all career educators?
Well, we've done a lot of this. It was with our principal supervisors and then with the department chiefs in regards to the work that we would need from the department chiefs. Now, and this was for phase 1, as we phase out in regards to what is it that we are trying to accomplish and what you saw here. Now, as we go into the next part of phase 1 will be for us now to, of course, work with our principals and then and principal supervisors, and then talk about in regards to the next step in planning for the intents from March up until the end of the year and for the work that we're going to do over the summer. So those will be the individuals that will be involved.
Okay, so, and I'm glad that we acknowledge that this is not going to be a quick fix, because I'm hoping that as part of this, I've always envisioned it that the house got torn down and we have to rebuild it. So I hope we rebuild it in a way that long-term educates more students. So I would just ask that we put on the to-do list to get input from parents, community, and students, right, about what our room for improvement, right? And I think for me, it's particularly interesting to hear from the students that have lost their way, so to speak, like the students in alternative ed, to say why didn't you remain actively engaged in the academic process? Okay, so that's that. So are we doing any, this is all fantastic. And I've already shared all my little, nitty gritty comments with Mr. Oswald about this, but are we doing any reminders and or training for teachers about portfolios?
Yes, we will. We will. Our first conversation with portfolios will be taking place on next Thursday with
Okay.
our principals, and then after we share the updates with principals, are you referring? Let me stop. Are you referring to grade 3 portfolios?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, we were doing the training with update to principals on next Thursday during PLA. Then after principals, we would then be setting up the trainings for all of our grade 3 teachers.
Okay, thank you. And then I want to follow up, and I think this is kind of, I think, in the same vein as Mr. Barbieri's previous comment, but as part of this, I'm gonna call it a restructuring. Can we figure out how to expand access to reading recovery? I mean, I know it's expensive, yada yada yada, but you know, ignorance is free. I mean, come on, like, can we just see how to do that? Because I have never seen anything negative in your own document. You have some 88% or something effect, 99% of the participating students demonstrated growth. So, I mean, unless you find something better, right? But it's always had rave reviews. We do, in my opinion, we have not pushed it enough. And I think we have it in grade 1. In my mind, we should expand it, just expand access and include grades 2 and 3 as well. I mean, that would be my magical thinking. I realize it's expensive, but we have to figure out how to do the really small group eyeball to eyeball. That's where real instruction takes place, right? That's when the light bulb comes on. And so, I mean, I'm just going to request that I've asked for it repeatedly, and I know the answer is in Mr. Burke's laptop. So then when we go to slide 20, I don't know if I missed this, but the question on why is the problem occurring, is that kind of rhetorical today? Or did you answer that? That's okay. So, and then on the 90-minute reading block, that includes time on iReady? That 90-minute reading block?
Yeah, that would be played in core.
Okay.
But it can be extended outside of core as well. There's different aspects to the program that could be used outside of core.
Okay. And can we please remind all of our educators that iReady is not the teacher?
Yes, and it's not.
It is not,
It's not.
Correct.
right?
That's part of the professional
Okay,
development.
okay. And then the balanced literacy framework. So are we kind of shifting that balance like way towards phonics now?
It's always been a component of balanced literacy. You and I have had many conversations about this, so it definitely is a core piece of the instruction, but around the fidelity issue has been part of our conversation. Is definitely an area that needs to be strengthened. The program that will be brought to the board next month, Benchmark, has a strong component, as well as many of our schools have implemented a number of phonics programs, in particular at the primary grades, much better with fidelity.
That's different than yes?
Yes, then yes.
Okay,
The answer
I'm
is
just
yes.
checking now
The
because.
answer is yes.
Okay. You know, when I got caught doing wrong, I would explain a lot to my mom, right? I'm just saying.
I just say when I was an elementary teacher, it was part of my program back then.
Okay, I just, you know, I think I need some coffee because I couldn't find the yes in there. Okay. And then the last thing, and I'm gonna just put it out there, I know Mr. Oswald and I had this conversation already, but in terms of how we deliver lessons, can we please actively search for the creativity and really open the space for teachers to find their passion again? And so that we're not doing just more of the same thing, that we're backing it up and we're doing it differently, more creatively, something that will make the students sit up, lean forward, and also that the teachers can find their joy again. We've got the standards, but what the lesson is to teach that standard needs to come from like a joyous place so we can engage. Because when the teacher is enthusiastic, the student's gonna pay more attention and get it. So, okay, that's my soapbox. I'm done for now. Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you, and I know we have a lot of work to do, and it's all across the country. I sit on the meetings with 76 urban school districts, and we're all saying the same thing. But as I look at this Student Academic Support Plan, Update 1, I just really hope that we can make sure that the community stakeholders in these populations where most of these children are, we kind of know the ones that are truly suffering because they've been suffering before the pandemic, that we found a way to talk to those stakeholders. You have educational advisory boards and the Tri-Cities Glaze. I would think that this would be a document that you would be working with them on as we begin to go through the different processes. An evening setting to work through this. We've just actually started a new advisory board in Westlake, and we have one in Wellington and Royal Palm Beach. These are the kinds of things we need to let people know that we've had learning loss. They know it's going to take 2 years or more to bring the children back. They know some of the children have been behind. And we have to help the parents. I think the principal supervisors, the teachers, and everybody that's got to get this work done, they need to have an umbrella around them. Because if you're in the neighborhood and you live in the community and you're talking to parents, because that this piece is now being developed, we've got extra monies to help get this done, and we're going to be doing things different. I loved it when you said, Ms. Sheffield, that some of them are already doing after school and weekends and things like that, because Saturday schools was a big deal at one while, and a lot of progress was made for a lot of children. And so we've got to begin to figure out how we can get out of the box to help these children, and we have great minds here within the school district, but I just hope that we have a way that we're going to mesh this with our community stakeholders that are helping through the educational arena as we move through this process, so that the things that you have here can be even supplemented with some more ideas on how we can save the children, because there's just a lot of work to be done. So do you all have that kind of mapped into this piece that you're going to be doing this conversation with those folks who are meeting every month to try to figure out what we're going to do to help the children? The schools already know.
It's not mapped in, but, Mr. Oswald also will make it a priority. I mean, you as board members, your various advisory groups. Mm-hmm. So if you want us to, have no problem going and sharing this with them. So if you have the contact and so forth for us to reach out and to invite ourselves to become one of their agenda items, then we'll be more than happy to do so.
Yes, I think it's important because this is going to be a long-term process. So I don't want something to come up later and then, they say, well, we didn't know anything about this. Somebody could have reached out to us. I see the school piece is good and with the principal supervisors, but they can't do it all by themselves. And the teachers need that support. And we have really various means out there in the community with folks who are willing to give their time and attention to help move this. And many times they know these students personally because they're from the neighborhood.
Yeah, there's a funders group, Ms. Andrews, to your point, that we met with recently to talk about this plan, and they fund a lot of different agency groups to really prioritize certain areas. So absolutely, but we can definitely expand, as Dr. Sheffield said, to these municipality support groups as well.
So it's in this focus group piece.
And I would just add one piece, Ms. Andrews. I think, Dr. Sheffield and Keith Oswald, and their work is going to be directly tied to the strategic planning rollout. So a lot of these meetings, they probably just overlooked it today, but it's already going to be part of that work because we've already started reaching out about different community groups that we can be a part of. So it's going to be one and the same in a lot of instances, that their work will be tied to the development of the strategic plan.
There are no more. Go ahead, Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. Kind of a two-part. So the Summer Reading Academy at this moment, is this still, the previous framework, as I remember, was like a half day, 4 days a week for several weeks. Mm-hmm. And and that was, in my mind, the Summer Reading Academy was essentially designed to get the students over the hump enough so that they could be promoted. But I'm asking that we look to see how we can use this time and these opportunities to really help them develop their reading skills and not just get over the hump, if that makes sense. So in my mind, it should be longer. And again, I get the finances were limited, but I just want to throw that out. And then the other thing is I would like to get a thoughtful response later. Why would we not make, for example, foundations part of our core in those early primary years, for like across the board?
They
Because I
didn't-
mean,
yeah.
yeah.
They didn't apply. They have to submit a proposal, and they did not.
Okay, so,
Part of
all
the
right, so that's the
textbook adoption
procedural
process.
reason? So I'm gonna just ask that, okay, let me rephrase it. Would it be good for the children in Palm Beach County School Districts if we did that? That's what I want the answer to. And then, if the answer was yes, then it would be, well, what would it take? Because the data I'm gonna show at the end of this meeting is gonna show that we are really, really lacking when it comes to some of those foundational skills, and I'm trying to find the answer. Okay, and again, in my mind, now that the house has been blown down by the hurricane and we had to rebuild, let's rebuild it strong and right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both, Mr. Superintendent.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Deputy Superintendent and RCA, Dr. Glenda Sheffield. At this time, I will have Dr. Sheffield stay in place and bring up our Director of Exceptional Student Education.